Hey guys, and welcome back to Bible Fun with the Dunns. Today we're at Proverbs,
Psalms 106 and 107. So we're at senior adult camp, if you notice a little change of scenery. And actually we just finished studying and talking about, and Daddy brought a word on Psalm 106. So we thought it was a good jump start, and then it was like quiet time, and so we all came back to the room, and I'm like, since we've been reading, let's go on and finish reading. And so Psalm 106 is a really good psalm that recaps Israel's relationship with the Lord. I think it's really cool that if you just have the book of Psalms, you still have many opportunities to know the relationship and the history between the Israelites, God's people, and God. I think that's really cool. And then Psalm 107 is a lot of worship and a lot about the goodness of what God has done. And so my big takeaway comes from 107, so I'm going to save all that for just a second. But Jax is going to share from his takeaway today.
Okay, so in chapter 106, the Israelites, they keep turning from God and running away from Him, and all that kind of stuff.
Excuse me. Keep going.
Okay, but the thing is, God, although He punishes them, He doesn't let go of them. He still loves them. And even when they run from Him, He still loves them.
I love that too. And I think that's real relationship. I think there is no relationship where anyone is perfect, where anyone doesn't hurt the other person's feelings or do something wrong, except for God's side. Obviously, He is perfect. But I love that we see this cycle of the Israelites making mistakes. I wish they hadn't, but it helps us to feel like we're not total mess ups when we do sin and when we live that same cycle. Because the Israelites are actually a pretty good picture of anyone in their relationship with God. And Psalm 106 is just a really cool picture. My favorite part of it is that it shows that God is steadfast. The first few verses of that is, give thanks to the Lord, for He is good, for His steadfast love endures forever. And then it shows the ups and downs of the Israelites, them sinning, them returning to God, calling upon God's name. And the whole time, no matter how horrible the Israelites were, He's always there loving them. Now, do they get consequences?
Yes.
Yes, they do. But He never takes His love away. And so Psalm 107 kind of goes along with that. And what I see is a picture of lots of different kinds of people calling on God's name, and every single time, no matter who they are, no matter how horrible they are, every time the person calls on God's name, He answers. And so my takeaway today in Psalm 107, I'm reminded of how God is waiting for us to call upon Him. Not just for that salvation. That's the big call upon Him and He will save us. That is so important, and that's where our relationship begins. But even after that, it's important to know that salvation experience is the beginning of our relationship. And there will be many times in our lives where we will keep on calling on Him. And so in Psalm 107, we see a few examples of people calling on Him. The first person is in verse 4. It's the lost person calling on Him. And it says in verse 6, they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them from their distress. The next person, a rebellious prisoner, someone in jail, a bad guy, the bad guy. And in verse 13 it says, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them from their distress. The next one, the sinful fool. It starts in verse 17, and it says in verse 19, they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them from their distress. And then again, men in the ships that were in their ships, it starts in verse 23. It's kind of divided into stanzas. And these people were probably exiles that were being held captive. We're not really sure. But in verse 28, it says, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them from their distress. And I love the end of Psalm 107. It tells of God's goodness, how He's always present, always waiting for all of these people and all of us to call upon Him. First for salvation, first to have a relationship with Him. When we call upon Him, we're recognizing I'm not good enough on my own and I need a rescuer, and that's who God is. And then after that, later on, in different situations, whether we're trying to not sin, whether we're trying to get away from temptation, whether we're going through a hard time, there are other times, many times in our lives after salvation, that we will need to call upon him. And I'm so thankful that he is steadfast. His love is steadfast, and he's always there waiting. And it says in verse 33, he turns rivers into a desert, springs of water into thirsty ground, a fruitful land into a salty waste because of the evil of its inhabitants. He turns a desert into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water. And there he lets the hungry dwell, and they establish a city to live in. They sow fields and plant vineyards and get a fruitful yield. And that shows the sovereignty that God has over everything that Jax is talking about. So no matter what we're going through, in our need, in our lack, in our good times, in our wealth, in our poverty, we still need God, and we still need to call upon him. Romans 10:13 says that all who call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So if you don't know him as Savior, if you need a relationship with him to begin with, when you call upon him and you want him to save you, his own word in Romans 10:13 tells us that he will save us. And then later in life, when we're going through things, when we're scared, when we're lonely, when we're sad and depressed, or even when we're happy and we just need a friend to celebrate with or talk to, the Bible tells us over and over again, when we call upon him, he will be there with us. Psalm 107 verse 43 says, whoever is wise, let him attend to these things, and let them consider the steadfast love of the Lord. So for today's challenge, that's what I want us to do. It's the last verse of what we read today, the last verse of Psalm 107. Let's all do this. Let's spend time thinking about and talking about the steadfast love of the Lord. And that is the never stopping, never giving up, always and forever love. I think that's what our children's storybook tells us. And I love the way she describes that. And let's just call upon him from wherever we are today, in a good situation, in a bad situation. If you don't know him as your Savior and you haven't asked him to save you, maybe today is that day. Let's call upon him. Love y'all, friends. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.